I'd like to thank AMSEC for allowing me to represent the American Board today, and the officers, the directors, membership. I'd also like to recognize there are a few directors in the current and former American Board of Directors in the crowd right now. Brad Kulat back there, he's a current director. Former past presidents, Linda Mangiero and Linda Cantu. And I'm not sure if I saw anybody. Oh, David Bishop, another past president over there. Thank you for doing this. Even without my glasses, I could see that. But anyway, it's an honor for us to be able to come and talk to you about the things that have gone on in the board over the last year. This is the third year that we've given a presentation at this type of meeting, and it's been extremely helpful for the American Board. The American Board has gotten quite a bit of useful feedback from the comments and questions we've had in this forum. And presenting this kind of forum is such a valuable tool for somebody like the board or AMSEC or anybody in this room for that fact, because the questions, it's a good forum. I mean, I'm sure we've all seen PerfList and PerfMail, which are great mediums, but they have their limitations. This is the kind of forum that really a good exchange of information can be had. Okay, disclosures. Debbie Edens and myself rotated off the board of directors 3/2/13 just a few days ago. And here's another thing. The American Board, I'm sure you all know or saw the news that the Hattiesburg was hit by quite a tornado about a month ago. And luckily for the American Board office, it hit everything around them. They suffered minimal damage, but yet still there was some damage, a little bit of water damage, nothing to any of the files, nothing to anything that was permanent and couldn't be repaired. However, since the area was in such shambles from the aftermath of the tornado, the American Board decided, or the National Office decided it was time. They needed more space anyway. They were going to be going an extended period of time without internet, which for us these days is kind of a tough thing to do, especially when you've got some exams coming up and you've got some active times when the office has quite a bit of internet activity. So the decision was made just to move to a larger space, and this was one thing that just kind of pushed it a little quicker. So those are a couple things I just want to let everybody know about. Now, in light of that move, currently the phone numbers are being rolled over. They wanted to keep the same phone numbers for the board office that they had previously, but since they moved to a different zip code, they're going to end up ultimately with different numbers. But right now, for I think the next month or two, the old number will roll over. But I'm sure you're going to get some kind of notification that will make sure that you have the correct phone number in the future. And obviously, the best thing to do from this point forward is just check the website. All the updated information is going to be on there, including the address. So I think that would be the wisest thing to do. The new directors and officers. David Palmer will be your new president in 2013. Ed Delaney, vice president. Kyle Spear, treasurer. Ann Gretcho, secretary. David Boyne, director. Pat French, director. Chuck Johnson, director. And Brad Kulat and Carol Ann Rosenberg. And, of course, Beth Richmond and Steve Oshrin are our executive co-directors at the national office. Now, with any of these presentations, since we've done this presentation a few times before, we'd like to start with what the board's position is actually specifically on certification, what it means to the board, and what it is that we're striving for as directors and an organization for certifying. Extracorporeal technologies such as ECMO, VAD, autotransfusion, blood therapy, pediatric perfusion, adult perfusion, and hepatic support are part of the consensus curriculum developed by the ACPE and are followed by accredited perfusion education programs. It is therefore the position of the ABCP that all CCPs have acquired knowledge and have demonstrated through the certification process a validated level of knowledge in these areas. Blanket statement, but it kind of sums up everything about what the board actually does with their certification exam and the recertification process. Previous presentations that have been given by the American Board at these forums included some information on the ABC mission statement. Briefly, it's enhancing the advancement of the profession through the certification process. The certification exam, we've gone through fairly specifically how the questions are written, how they're looked at, the history behind the questions, how they're validated, and how they're constructed. And obviously the validation process once again, and question analysis. These are all things that we went into a little more specifically. With this presentation, we'll touch very lightly on that, but more emphasis is going to be given on which direction the American Board is going in the future, or the changes that have been made recently over the last couple of years, because there have been some significant changes in the certification process. The certification examination, obviously, everybody knows that it's PBSE is the first part of the examination. The whole point of the PBSE is it tests for knowledge of basic science as it applies to perfusion. The CAPE, on the other hand, measures the examinee's understanding of practice of clinical perfusion. So the goal of the two exams are a little bit different. Anybody who's been in the field long enough understands that the CAPE is something that replaced the oral exam a number of years ago. Each examination has approximately 220 questions to be completed in 4 hours. That's pretty much the standard of testing time, what's recommended for testing facilities to test on this number of questions. And this was a big jump for the American Board. I think probably everybody in the room now is familiar with the fact that the American Board, since 2007, has been using computer-based testing. This has been a big boom for the people taking the exams. There was a big concern initially that there may be some exam differences when the test switched from paper and pencil over to exam. However, if you looked at the statistics and the passing rates over the years, the exam didn't skip a beat, and there really was no change whatsoever in test scores. And I guess, maybe we can attribute that to the fact that the newer generation is so much more technology savvy than maybe some of us in the older ranks are. But really, it didn't seem to make a difference, and we didn't see any blip in the scoring. The knowledge-based validation, this is one of the things that makes the exam what it is. The exam is validated every 5 to 7 years. It was most recently done in between 1209 and 1010. And the good thing about this validation, a couple things changed. For those of you who have taken part of the validation maybe 10 years ago, remember the big booklet you used to get and how long it used to take to finish that? One of the problems with that booklet was in the beginning people were very diligent about filling it out, but as you get to the end, it got very dogmatic, and our results, whenever something is that long and that tedious, sometimes the results might suffer a little bit. So there was a concern with that, so we made 2 changes to the validation process. The first biggest change was it was put online. It could be accessed through abcp.org. At this point, I don't anticipate another validation process for another, let's see, this is 13, so probably another 3 to 4 years. The second big thing was the validation tool was broken down and made much more general. We took a lot of the specific areas out of it because we wanted to get the general areas and we wanted to capture better data. We had a few less fields, but I think we got better data in the long run. And here's the good part. There were 730 surveys completed. That's pretty good when you consider there's approximately 3,911 certified perfusionists. I think whenever you capture that many perfusionists that are giving input as to what should be tested on and how important it is, I think that's a good tool. And there's one other little caveat to this whole thing. We also decided to award CEUs for those people who completed the validation tool. So all those things helped. And again, it keeps the exam current. It makes sure that the American Board is testing on things that are relevant and that people actually use, and there's some importance that has been tagged onto those particular items. The practice exam, the American Board does have We're going to be presenting at the student session as well, and we'll go into the practice exam much more there. But that was developed in 2008. And the whole idea behind the practice exam was to develop a tool that prospective examinees could look at an exam and take an exam that has questions that are constructed like the PBSE exam and the CAPE exam. The interesting thing, the results are given by category, they're not given by question, and the results, nothing gets done with the results. Because of the fact that the candidates who decide to take the practice exam are shifted over to the Prometric website, the American Board really doesn't keep track of anything. Not only that, there are no prerequisites, so not only could we have senior perfusionists, we could have students taking the exam, or we could have manufacturers taking the exam as well. So any of the statistics that derive from a practice exam really wouldn't be of any benefit. So the benefit is truly and only for the prospective students or new grads that are taking the certification exam. Now, here's the examination statistics for the year, most recent spring and fall of 2012. Really, the only thing that jumps out as far as these statistics go is that the numbers in the spring are lower than the numbers in the fall as far as how many people taking the exam. We have 54 here and 112 there. Now, the reason for that is obviously students all graduate in June. So they're all going to want to jump on the fall exam as best they can. So that's why you see the big numbers here. And really, the people who take the exam up here, and we can only speculate on this, are the people who either can't get the cases in or their transcripts are dated at a time when it doesn't allow them to get through to it in the fall. The other interesting statistic on here is, and it sort of attests to the reliability of the exam, is right here, the multiple test takers. You can see the number is low. What it shows is if you didn't do well on it the first time, there may be a good chance you might not do well the second time unless there's some type of intervention, remediation, you change your study habits, or you do something different. That's typically what it shows on the PBSE. CAPE is a little different because it's more of a practical exam, practical knowledge, but at least on the PBSE, this is a trend that we look at. It doesn't, we can't put a lot of teeth into it, but these are just one of the things that we see. Now here's the 13-year statistics, beginning of year 2000, going all the way down to 2012. Of course, everybody is aware, and the state of Illinois is a prime example of this. Once you get your license in the state of Illinois, as long as you're willing to stay in Illinois forever, you don't need to maintain your ABCP certification. There was a fear back when, and I don't know how many states have adopted this policy, but if you look over on the side and see what the drop rate is of lost certification over a 12, 13-year span, it really hasn't changed much at all. And you got a little bit of a high bump here and here, but I don't know if we can attribute that to anything. I don't know if there's enough data to really tell us why that happened. But I think most overwhelmingly convincing is the fact that these numbers hang around 2%, and that's where they've been. So there's not a big movement, despite more states getting licensure. There's not a movement to drop certification. So the perfusionists at this point still see a value in the certification process. Clinical simulation, a hot button at just about every meeting we've gone to. It's been a topic within the American Board for at least the last 5 years. And it's without a doubt, it's possibly one of the most exciting technologies out there. As of today, the American Board gives Category 1 CEUs to face-to-face simulation programs pending review. This is something we already do. And the next step in this is the ABCP recognizes the educational value of high-fidelity clinical simulation. However, further standardization, validation of the equipment, algorithms, as well as training of the clinical simulation operators will be necessary for the ABC to consider this technology as an educational requirement or clinical activity category. Now, we know the American Board, the one thing that they do recognize is the fact that clinical simulation in the schools is becoming very, very, a very valuable tool for the schools. And somewhere down the road, in a not too distant future, there may be simulation programs that are put together, and there may be cases that can be accepted, reviewed, and submitted to the board for clinical activity. Right now, that is not the case, and I wouldn't even say we're too terribly close to it. But as you go to each one of these meetings and you sit in the simulation sessions, you can see the direction that things are going. And obviously, it's going to be a viable part of what a lot of us as perfusionists are doing in the future. Changes in the process. This is what I really want. This is really the backbone behind what we wanted to say here today. Probation. Remember the old probation? Well, that word doesn't exist anymore as far as people who are unable to fulfill their professional or clinical requirements. So now what is called is conditional certification. There was always sort of a negative context to being on probation. Now the ironic thing is that once you go on probation, really nobody knows anyway, or in this case, conditional certification. It's between you and the American board. You clear your issues, and then it's expunged from your CCP is back in good standing, and nobody knows anything about it. Conditional certification, we just felt was a better word for it. We think it's more appropriate because now with the new changes, you are still certified even if you fell short of whatever the activity is until you fulfill certain things. So conditionally, you're certified for that year. If you don't fulfill the new requirements, then you won't be anymore. But at least we thought this was an appropriate change. There's still probation. Excuse me. Probation still will be used when it comes to ethics issues or anything like that, because there are areas where the probation tag or term is still going to be very viable. Category 1, this is something that just happened. Category 1 CEUs are awarded for clinical instructors. This will begin 1/1/14, January 1st of next year. Anybody who's looked at the BOI lately will realize that formerly this was a Category 3, I believe it was. And we just decided, that the board discussed this, and because of the amount of interaction with the perfusionist and the student, and I think probably a general consensus would be that running cases as a primary perfusionist with a student can certainly add a level of complexity and forces you to do your homework before you have to teach it. So that was one of the reasons. That supported why we made that switch. Supervised cases replace making up cases as of 1/1/13. This is already in effect. But what I want to say is that this whole process was started by a letter from a perfusionist who basically laid out a scenario and said, why wouldn't you consider this? And the entire process probably took 2 years. And the reason it takes 2 years, and it needed to take 2 years, the reason it took this long, because anytime you make a change in anything, especially when it comes to regulatory conditional information, what you change here affects 10 more things over here. And even to this date, since this has gone into effect, the board gets unique scenarios that somehow either fall between the cracks or create a unique circumstance behind the new rules. So we've had a number of these already, and I'm sure the future board is going to have more of them. There's going to be a growing process whenever a change like this is made. However, the board felt very strongly over the fact that when somebody finds himself short of cases, the following year, if he has to make up the cases that he didn't do the year before, how does that necessarily make him more competent or a better perfusionist? It's a tough thing to argue. Let's say somebody is only able to, simplifying things, you're supposed to do 40 cases a year. Let's say you do 20 and find yourself on conditional certification. The next year, under the old system, you would end up having to do 60. You'd have to do what you didn't do the year before and what you have to do this year. Sometimes, depending on your program, you can find yourself circling the drain in a scenario like that. And it's just a matter of time till you slip down the drain and you lose your certification. Rather, as suggested by the recommendation letter, the suggestion letter we got from a perfusionist, they said, why don't you require that when somebody finds themselves in this position, why don't you require them to do supervised cases? Because if you think about it pragmatically and realistically, who is better to judge whether that person is safe to do cases or competent to do cases? Because I know the board stays away from the word competency. But who's better to judge that than the perfusionist peers? So if the employer is willing to supervise that perfusionist and say he's good, he knows what he or she is good, they know what they're doing, then we as the American board, more power to them. I mean, I think that's really the American board cannot delve into that competency area. What the American board is set up to do is derive knowledge and measure clinical activity and professional activity, not competency. You can derive the fact that if they've done a successful examination, if they've done all these cases, then maybe a person is competent, but that's not something the board can ever say. But I think in this case, it does start to put the onus back on the employer and the employees to really look at themselves and say, would we want this person to be pumping cases at our institution, even if he wasn't able to do cases for a period of time? Now, the other thing you can do is we've added an additional year where, let's say, somebody finds himself in some kind of issue, maternity leave, medical leave, military leave. There's a ton of different leaves out there. Bottom line is they're all the same. For one reason or another, somebody cannot perform in the operating room. Now, this is a difficult situation for perfusionists in the past. You can really get yourself in trouble with cases, and you can find yourself losing your certification. ABCP certification is one of the most difficult things to get back into once you lose it. It's a tough thing to do, and it takes a big commitment to do it. People have done it, and we recognize those people and admire them for doing so. But we just felt that there needed to be a good, fair, sound process for people that run into trouble for many times reasons not even their own. We've had how many wars over the last 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, 10 years? There's just a ton of things that change people's ability to be able to do the profession that they love to do. So you can now, if you're unable to clear your conditional certification after that second year, sometime before that you have to appeal to the board, write to the board, let them know what's going on, and you can request an additional year. You're still going to have to do supervised cases when you come back, and you're still going to be required to do professional activity during that time you're off. And the caveat with that is that there's so much professional activity that's available online that it really shouldn't be a problem, at least maintaining being current with the literature. Recertification, this is a hot button, and technology. I mean, that's, we now have a committee, or actually the American Board has a committee now, and they specialize in electronic data and how it's handled. There have been, now there's ways to, people who use database programs, data management programs can directly import their data into the American Board for your certification process. There's some people do it, some people don't, but it's an option, it's out there, but it just, I mean, these are all the things that we're trying to develop to make sure that the American Board is ready to step into the future with all the other technology advancements that are out there. Another thing that you saw that we have, there's a committee working on QR codes, and Brad back there knows a lot about these things. QR codes, they use them here. Every year at the meeting, we try to look at a way to see if they're going to fit in with the American Board and how our business operates. But as of right now, the QR codes just don't lend themselves too well to what we're trying to do. If you notice on your little blue card, you can snap it on your smartphone and pick up the AMSEC mobile website, and you can get the program. And that kind of thing makes perfect sense. I think the goal maybe somewhere down the road is to use a QR code, take a picture of it when you're at a meeting, and it takes you automatically to the professional activity page of the American Board website. I mean, that would be the goal, but then that creates, you'd have to have lots of new QR codes generated. But QR codes are new. They're like lasers when they first hit the market, and there's a ton of possibilities with them. Now, the ABCP, looking forward, promotes safety and protection of the public, as well as enhance the attainment of perfusion knowledge through certification and recertification process. Continue to work with CCPs and maintain and improve the examination certification process. Continue to evaluate clinical simulation technology. Continue to support state licensure boards. There's an incredible amount of work that goes on between the American Board Office and each individual state as they plod through the licensure process. And continue to serve as an advocate for all CCPs. And last but most, one of the most important things, ensure the future viability of the certification and recertification process. And to do this means looking at clinical simulation, looking at all different types of technology, QR codes, data downloading, better ways to test, more modified ways to test. There's a ton of things, and they all have to be looked at equally at every meeting the American Board has. With that, I'd like to thank everybody for allowing me the opportunity to speak. And I have a few minutes, and if anybody has any questions, I'll answer them as best I can.